Very good morning, all. Today we'll be discussing about a respiratory tract and the process of inspiration and expiration. I think some of you might be aware of the respiratory system. And I think many of us are certainly unaware of the functions or the details of a respiratory tract. Hope you find this session to be useful to understand the functions of the respiratory tract. Um, so to start with, you just see the image that I have given here. So the first part is a nasal cavity, which is the nostrils, and then we have the pharynx, and then I have it is followed by the pharynx is followed by epiglottis, and then we have larynx, which is here it is given in green color. So the larynx can also be called as a voice box, and then the larynx is and next to the larynx we have trachea. And I think you could see some of the fine lines on the trachea. We call that as a cartilage rings. And then the trachea is divided into two branches, and we call that as a bronchus, right? So this is your larynx, and this is your trachea. And this trachea is divided into two branches. Yes, and we call that as a bronchus. And this bronchus is divided into branches. We call that as bronchiole. Yes, this bronchus is divided into branches. We call that as bronchiole. And then this bronchiole is further divided into finer branches. We call that as alveoli. Actually, at first we'll be having an alveolar ducts, and that gets divided into a thin, finer grape-shaped air sacs. We call that as an alveoli. And then we know that there'll be a lung, which is nothing but a pair of spongy organs where the process of inspiration, expiration, and exchange of gases to the body will happen. So with this introduction, we can just get into the functions of the entire respiratory tract. So the air enters the nose to the nostrils, and there the air gets completely moistened up. And of course, we will be having some dust particles in the air, and that gets filtered by the hair present in the nostrils. And we also have additional filters, which is nothing but a mucus and cilia. This will act as an additional filters. And behind the nose, we have a pharynx, and air passes from the pharynx to the larynx. The larynx can also be called as a voice box. And the opening leading to the larynx is called as glottis. And this glottis is provided by a lid, which we call that as an epiglottis, because there'll be two passages, one for food and another for air. Only this epiglottis actually prevents food from entering the passage to the lungs. So from the larynx, the air goes to the trachea or the windpipe, right? So this is a trachea. This can also be called as a windpipe. And this trachea is about 11 centimeters long. And this is completely guarded by the C-shaped cartilage rings. So as I already mentioned, there are thin, fine lines drawn on the trachea. We call that as cartilage rings. So this cartilage rings, it is actually helping the trachea in collapsing. So this cartilage rings acts as a guard actually. So this trachea is guarded by the cartilage rings, which will be 16 to 20 in number. And then the trachea is divides into two tubes called bronchi. And each bronchus, as I already mentioned, it just branches out in the form of thinner tubes called bronchioles. So this is bronchus, and this thinner tubes, right? They are called bronchioles. And this bronchioles enter the lungs and divides further into the finer branches called alveolar ducts. And this opens into an extremely thin wall, grape-shaped air sacs called alveoli, right? So we have some grape-shaped almost like a ball here inside the lungs, right? So this will be almost grape-shaped air sacs. We call that as an alveoli. And of course, lungs are a pair of spongy organs which lies in the chest cavity formed by the ribs. And of course, exchange of gases between air and the body takes place in the capillary covered alveoli inside the lungs. So this is a complete respiratory tract. So with this knowledge, we can just get into the topic of inspiration and expiration. Inspiration is the process of breathing in by which air is brought into the lungs. So now what happens is the muscle attached to the ribs on the outer side, they gets contracted and this expands your chest cavity. So when there is more space, when the expansion of chest cavity creates almost a partial vacuum in the chest, so this actually gives more space for the air to get filled, right? So obviously the expansion of chest cavity, this is going to create partial vacuum and this sucks in air into the lungs. Also, in the figure, we didn't talk so far anything about the diaphragm. So this diaphragm is nothing but a wall between the chest cavity and the stomach cavity. We call that as a diaphragm. So the muscle wall between the chest cavity and the abdominal cavity is called a diaphragm. And this diaphragm, this will move downwards when you inhale the air. So this further expands the chest cavity. So the expansion of the chest cavity, this is going to create a partial vacuum. And this sucks in air into the lungs and fills the expanded alveoli. So this is a process of inspiration. And now coming to the process of expiration. So here, after the exchange of gases in the lungs, the air has to be expelled. So expulsion of the air from the lungs is called expiration. In this process, muscles attached to the ribs on the inner side, right? Inner side gets contracted. Whereas in the case of inspiration, muscles attached to the ribs on the outer side gets contracted. Here on the inner side, it gets contracted. And there'll be some relaxation, right, of the abdominal muscles and the diaphragm. So this obviously decrease in the wall. This obviously decreases the volume in the chest cavity. And this decrease in volume is going to increase the pressure on the lungs. So this pressure, it is going to actually push the air out. So the air in the lungs is pushed out and passes through the nose. So when we just breathe out, I think I have to repeat this again. When you expel air, when expiration happens, there is a decrease in the volume of the chest cavity. So this decrease in volume is going to increase the pressure on the lungs. And this increase in pressure is going to push the air out. And that passes through the nose. So when we breathe out, of course, not all the air in the lungs will get expelled. So some of the air will remain there in the lungs. And this keeps the lungs from collapsing and allows more time for the exchange of gases. So this is purely the process of expiration. So I think so far we have discussed the entire respiratory tract, right, which involves the nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, glottis, epiglottis, trachea, bronchus, bronchioles, alveolar ducts, and lungs. And then we just slowly entered into the process of inspiration and expiration. I think the next topic is purely on sphygmomanometer, so which we'll be discussing in the next class. So with this, we can wind up today's session. Thank you all.